Nowhere that we go is a one-way street. Nothing that we love is a one-day key. And if we gon' do it, we gon' do this now. And if we say we gon' hold this down.
What is up, everyone? My name is Will Holdren. I am the host of the Willpower Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, and his name is Anthony Moore. And Anthony actually worked in the 9-to-5 world for quite some time in management. He was an excellent leader that led quite a bit of huge teams. He actually worked his way up to vice president of operations in some instances. Even with that being said, he decided to switch out of that role and go more into entrepreneurship and the real estate side of things. So with that being said, it's an honor to have him on here. So Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh man, Will, it's a pleasure, man. I love what you got going on here, brother. Very proud of you.
I appreciate that. Just trying to inspire, some people to also make that jump into entrepreneurship just like you did. So I kind of want to jump into your story a little bit. I know you did a lot of management. You worked in 9-to-5 for quite some time, and then you made that jump. So I just want to jump to the end of that story. So what made you want to leave management in the 9-to-5 world, even though you were quite successful in that arena, and go into entrepreneurship, which is something, newer for you?
I had done a lot of reading, man, and research, and I realized that a lot of wealthy people either park their money or they made their money in real estate. And then I read a book, I'm sure you've heard of it. A lot of people have heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad. And
Yeah.
I started looking at it. I'm like, man, I'm making $250,000 a year salary, but literally I'm seeing almost less than half of that in net income. You know what I mean? So I realized that in the business world, I would get my gross income. So I would get an offer letter saying, "Hey, Anthony, welcome to the team. Your salary is $250,000." But ultimately, in my head, I knew that okay, I'm considered by the government a highly compensated individual, which means that I'm in that 37% federal tax bracket, 3% for the state. So that's 40% gone right off the bat. You got 401k, you got all these other deductions. So then I get somewhere around 120 or whatever. Then out of that money, I still have to pay my mortgage, my car notes, my insurance, my groceries, my living expenses, vacations, investments, and all that stuff. And there's not really much left over after that. But as a business owner, I get to generate revenue, and then I get to pay all of my expenses, my truck payments for the trucking business or my depreciation on the houses that I own. If I have to travel, the IRS has certain guidelines around, as long as you're conducting business for a portion of that time, then, that entire trip, airfare, hotel, meals are all tax write-offs. So now, as opposed to, Uncle Sam taking money before I even see it, now I get to make the money, pay all of my expenses, and then what's left over, I pay tax on. So as a savvy investor and entrepreneur, I made sure that whatever's left over is as close to zero as possible, because obviously, or negative for that matter, right? Because anything times zero is zero, and anything times a negative number is a negative number, which means your taxes are pretty much null and void. So I haven't paid federal taxes or had to pay, I should say. I filed taxes, but I haven't had to pay because I have an accountant literally in 4 years. You know what I mean? Pennsylvania, I always end up owing a couple $100 here and there, but not a big
Right.
deal. So that's why I really wanted to that's what got me really interested in making that jump into the entrepreneur realm.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, that is a huge mindset shift, just like you're talking about. And like you said, it just took some knowledge outside of what you were doing, reading the books, listening to other videos, see what other people are doing out there with their money. So with that being said, why do you think most people can't really recognize the advantages of being a business owner, right? Or making that jump for themselves? Why do you think so many people struggle with doing that? Even though there's so many obvious,
it's indoctrination, So from my perspective, I grew up in North Carolina. My parents grew up in the Jim Crow South, so they had to experience desegregation basically. So they had white schools and black schools, and then at their senior year was forced integration, right? So that kind of swept across the U.S. And so now you've got, black and white and all sorts of nationalities together in school. And if you go back to the Jim Crow days, especially, with minority families, especially, your only dream back in the, 40s, 50s, 60s was to hopefully get a good job and pray that your employer took care of you. You know what I mean? You could retire from there. So, my parents, unfortunately, that was their their upbringing, which, we saw all these injustices. If I can just get a job and hold on to it, then I can provide for my family and things of that sort. So that's all you're taught. You know what I mean? So like even for me growing up through school, my parents really pushed that into me. Make sure you get your education. Make sure that get you a nice stable job. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Make sure you invest in your retirement. You know what I mean? So that it's
Yep.
indoctrinated, right? And if you really go back in time and study how the school system came about, it came through Rockefeller, you know what I mean? And Andrew Carnegie and those guys, right? So they literally wanted to have a system to generate employees, right? So you go to school, you're taught how to follow directions, you're taught how to, you know, do basic level problem solving. You're taught how to, again, follow instructions, be obedient. You know what I mean? You're not really taught how to be creative a lot of times in school. You're indoctrinated in order to become a good employee for somebody else, right? For that 1% or 0.5% people who have these big conglomerate corporations and things of that sort. So literally, it's kind of like that movie, The Matrix. So you're plugged in from birth, basically, and it takes a good book or a good documentary to get you thinking about things a little differently. And
Yep.
the other thing is, when you work for somebody else, it's safe, it's secure. You know what I mean? You come in, someone tells you what to do all day, you do that, and in exchange for your time, you get a paycheck. You know what I mean? But when you're an entrepreneur, you literally have to eat what you kill.
Yep.
So if you're not out there hustling, if you're not out there, generating a sound business and getting returns on those investments that you're making, you don't eat. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And I had some really rough and scary times where it was like, what the hell was I thinking? Maybe I need to go back to, what's comfortable.
Right.
But ultimately, that is not going to help me achieve my long-term wealth goals.
Yeah. 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 I think you said that pretty spot on and perfectly. I think a lot of people, like you said, not everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur, start their own business. But I also think the issue is that not a lot of people understand the other side of it. Like
Yeah,
you're talking about, people are just indoctrinated, go to college, get that job, and then retire, hopefully after 40, 50 years, right?
right,
Once you have your savings built up. And to me, not a lot of people are thinking about the other options of what's really out there. Like, is it really
right,
worth it to wait 40 or 50 years just so you can hopefully retire and
right.
have enough to live off of for the same amount?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a confusing
I mean,
concept.
you think about it, right? So typically you go and you start with a new company, you get 1 week or maybe 2 week vacation. You know what I mean? You might get some PTO, personal time off, but literally you're indoctrinated to work these crazy hours for someone else, exchange your time for a paycheck, have a week or so or a day here and there, a long weekend to vacate, versus you could literally make your whole lifestyle a bit. I can do my job just about from anywhere in the world as
Yep.
long as I have internet connection. You know what I mean? So I have freedom. And so a lot of times, to your point, people don't really know what they want. They think that,
Yeah.
they get that retirement after 40 or 50 years. But ultimately, what they really want, what they're saying is, I want freedom in 40 or 50 years. So I'm
Yeah.
willing to be in prison for,
Exactly.
this, next 20, 30 years so I can have that golden age of retirement, you
Yep.
know. So that is also something that goes into it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And just like you're talking about, like you got to do your own research, you got to listen to podcasts, you got to read books. And the issue is that a lot of younger people are not doing that, right? They're doing what their
Right.
parents say, they're going to college, and they're not really thinking on their own. So with that being said, I'm kind of curious. I want to hear your viewpoint on this. How can we kind of change that standard in America today? Like, what do you think are some things we could be doing to kind of change that culture and narrative? Because I think since COVID happened, I think it's starting to happen a little bit, right? People are
Oh
shifting
yeah.
toward entrepreneurship in general. But is there anything else that we could be doing? Do you think?
I honestly think there is no better time ever in the history of the world than now to look at how to become an entrepreneur. I mean, to your point, with COVID, everybody was stuck inside, and TikTok really became popular, right?
Yep.
You can find everything you want to know about anything on TikTok, YouTube,
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook, all these Facebook groups. Now you've got AI, Chat GPT, and Chat On, and all this stuff. You can actually ask the AI, how do I create a side hustle or a side business? How do I become an affiliate marketer? How do I become a drop shipper? How do I whatever, whatever, whatever? And the information is literally right there, and you can follow it from literally steps A through Z. But to your point, I think a lot of times, again, it's an indoctrination, but with your generation, man, I see a lot more people not following the status quo. Nobody wants to go into an office and sit for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Everybody in your generation now values one, they value corporate values and corporate, structure and, that corporate culture. They really value working for a company that they feel has the best interest of the world in mind. And two, they are more interested in, freedom and lifestyle. So I really kind of see a shift in, what I grew up in and what, my parents and my grandparents grew up in. So like things are definitely changing. So anyone who is really willing to make that effort and, find a different means of creating the lifestyle they want. I mean, the opportunity is right there at their fingertips.
Yeah, 100%. And I listen to a bunch of podcasts outside of mine. That's some of the things that like Andy Frisella says, as well as like if you're a beast in nowadays era, you can make a
Yeah.
lot of stuff happen because a lot of people are not out there doing the work and what it really takes to, make it successful. So there's a huge blue sea of like open business that you can go out there and just dominate in.
Yeah, and what you're doing right now with this podcast and your social media presence, man, I mean, like literally, you are helping to
Yeah.
change that narrative. You're helping to turn the page and open people's eyes to other possibilities, man.
Yeah. I appreciate it, man. It's one of the goals of the podcast.
Yeah,
One of the big
indeed.
goals. Yep. But yeah, I think you said it well as good too, is that, social media and nowadays the internet, we have everything at our fingertips and there's so many mentors that we could go out there and learn from.
Yeah,
Go back 20 years ago, that was not the case.
no.
Nowadays you can literally search in Google and find out whatever you want. So you're talking about, you just got to put in the effort and you can learn those skills to really take you where you want to go. So with that being said, I want to kind of go back to you a little bit. So I'm kind of curious if you could restart your career, right? I mean, like if you go back to being 20 again, like would you even go to college or what would you be doing at that age to kind of get ahead?
It's hard to say that I would change anything because ultimately, what prepared me for entrepreneurship are the experiences I had in the corporate America, right? So I started off in a rotational program. So they literally sent me to 4 different states and sent me over to England to live for a year. So I got to immerse in different cultures, different states, learn different processes, learn different leadership styles, learn how to, what motivates and influences people to do things. It really helped bolster, my leadership skills. It helped me understand how to run a single business, but how to run an entire business unit engulfing multiple plants. You know what I mean? So like those experiences really helped me. But to your point, if I had grew up in this generation, then I probably wouldn't have needed all of that. So literally, again, the book that really got me on the trajectory that I'm on now was, Think and Grow Rich, um, Richest Man in Babylon, and Rich Dad Poor Dad. Once I read those books, I understood like, oh my goodness, you know what I mean? Like I have gifts that I can monetize, excuse me, and it really just ultimately comes down to figuring out what it is and what angle and direction I want to go in. So to your point, I was very fortunate enough to have an athletic scholarship and then a scholarship with NASA to pay for my grad school. So I didn't necessarily have the student loan debt that, some of my peers had. So literally like now, I guess if I was growing up in this generation, I don't think I would incur, unless I had a scholarship, I probably wouldn't have gone to college. I would have gone to YouTube University
Yeah.
and figured some things out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge point as well. Coming out, college debt free is, a huge thing. A lot of kids incur so much debt and not realizing what they're really getting
Yeah.
themselves into. And then they get trapped, with that going forward. So that
I mean,
definitely.
to your point, I mean, but think about it. So that has been the blueprint for the last 100+ years, right?
Yeah.
Get out of high school, go to college, incur that debt, right? Get a job, get married, buy a house,
Yeah.
right? Have a couple of kids. Next thing you know, you have all these strangleholds on you. All right. So who benefits from you buying a house? The government and the banks.
Yep.
Okay.
Loan
Because
debt.
technically, unless you own your house free and clear, so when you buy a house, typically you're going to put 20% down, the other 80% is going to be financed by a bank. Okay. If you don't make those payments, the bank's going to foreclose on you. But even when you pay that house off and you don't pay your property taxes on it, they can still come take it from you, right? So you never really freely, truly own
Right.
property. When you get married and you have kids, especially at a young age. So a lot of my friends, they got married early, right after college, and they were, had 2 or 3 kids at the age of 24, 25, right? And now they're in a position where they have to work for the rest of their lives, or unless something changes, unless they win a lottery or have an inheritance. They're pretty much engulfed and enslaved to that lifestyle, right? Well, as for me, I knew that, and I'm not recommending this for anybody. This is just the path I chose. But I didn't want to get married or have kids immediately. You know what I mean? So like I knew that I wanted to move around. I traveled a lot for work. That was not, very uh, conducive to a good relationship. So I had a couple long distance relationships that didn't work out. I didn't want to have kids because I did not want to forego the things that I knew that I wanted to do in life. So now that
Yeah.
I'm fairly well established and comfortable and stable, now I can entertain that part of life because I never feel like it's too late to have that. People look at me and they're like, "You're how old and you've never been married? You don't have any kids?" And blah, blah, blah. Just like, don't put your indoctrination beliefs on me. I mean, I chose my
Yeah.
path, I went my path, I'm happy about my path. What I mean? So everybody's got to figure out what's best for them and stick to it.
Exactly. And that's a pretty interesting point as well. I know like my grandparents, for instance, got married at 18, right? Had kids like
Yeah,
18, and then
right,
yeah,
yeah,
kind of shifted, going forward because now people want more freedom, right? And then
right.
you say it's all about like more freedom nowadays. Like I
That's
don't know if
all it
you
is.
really thought about it. Like, would you rather have like a huge salary but you're working 80 hours a week, right? Or would you rather make like 5,000 like passively each month and you really control your own time? You can do whatever you want to do. So I think
Indeed.
it's kind of a shift in the mindset, in that regard. Like it's not just about the money in this case; it's more about having that flexibility in your life too.
And that's what it's about, man. So like a lot of people have a negative connotation on money. Like I said, I've had some relationships and like, all you care about is money. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, money to me represents time. It represents freedom. It represents being able to outsource all the things that I don't enjoy doing to have someone else do on my behalf to support my business so that I can go down and hang out in Florida or go to Greece or go wherever,
Exactly.
and have fun and not have to be bogged down or have to ask my boss, "Hey, I'd like to schedule a vacation next week. Can I go?" No, you can't, Anthony, because we don't have coverage for you. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
no, I want that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so different. It's so different. And so back to your story, I know you mentioned you were in management, you learned a ton of leadership skills and obviously stuff that you kind of took into entrepreneurship. So I know you could talk forever about that kind of stuff, but if you can narrow it down like a couple of the big things you learned about like running these huge teams and what really motivates people, like what would you pinpoint that kind of stuff to be that you've really carried over into your entrepreneurship stuff?
The first thing is understanding what your goals and objectives are for your either your team, your organization, your plant, your business unit, whatever that is. Once you as a leader fully understand that, then breaking that down in bite-sized chunks so that your leaders and your team underneath you can understand, what the goals are and how what they do impacts those objectives. And then to break it down even further, you break it down into action items and steps and metrics and goals for them to achieve so that once they hit their goals, their team hits, its goals, and then our plant hits its goals, and then ultimately our business unit hits its goals, right? So again, I got really good at understanding, what motivates people, so how to incentivize people to do the things that, we need them to do in order for our team and our plant and our business unit to be successful. So that's ultimately what it taught. And what I learned is, you know, what motivates people in North Carolina is different than Georgia, different than Virginia, different than California, different than Canada, different than England. You know what I mean? Like, so working in all these different cities and countries really helped me really understand how to adjust my leadership and communication style to be more effective.
Yeah. And so for those motivating factors, are they mainly incentives? Like, have you found out like just cash stuff or like what do you recommend for that kind of stuff for the motivating?
What do you? A lot of times, really and truly, I found that money is one of the least motivating factors or incentives. A
Wow.
lot of people just like time, so they like recognition. They like knowing that they're part of a bigger mission and that what they do actually matters. And for someone to take the time to come speak to them or take the time and say, "Hey, I recognize what you're doing. I'd like to give you an additional vacation day or a bit additional PTO." You know what I mean? Or I'll let you leave a couple hours early so you can go watch your kids' basketball game, whatever. A lot of times that meant so much more to people than $100 or $200 or a little bonus. You know what I mean? So
Interesting.
again, but it's all about understanding what motivates various individuals.
Right, in the different cultures. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's scientifically proven, man, that
yeah,
money is not as big of a motivator as a lot of people think.
yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things you mentioned was how important goals was, and kind of aligning that with your employees as well, making sure everyone's kind of working towards the same goals. So for you and your real estate business, I mean, what are some goals that you have on your real estate business, and like what targets you trying to hit over there on that side of things?
So I had a goal of I wanted to make at least $10,000 a month in rental income. All right. So what I had to do was break it down and understand, okay, if I want to make $10,000 of income, then how many properties does that mean that I need to have, and what type of properties and what locations, right? Because I have homes in this neighborhood that I currently live in, and in Aslan Heights in York. These properties go for $350,000, which means I can charge $2,600 of rent. Okay, so if that's the case, I only need a couple, 3 or 4 of those, and I'm good. So I have a couple homes here. I have a couple homes up in New Oxford. I have a couple in York City. So collectively, I reached that goal. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like once I got there, it's like, okay, so now I can sustain my life and I can focus my attentions elsewhere. So then I started my trucking business. And the same thing, I wanted to employ people, specifically those who need a second chance opportunity, like guys who have a criminal record or folks who, are shunned by some of the bigger companies. So, I have a kind of a mission-based organization in regards to that. So, kind of the same thing. I look at what my revenue targets are to cover all of my expenses, but then also to be able to pay my salary, right? So, in the real estate business, that's just passive rental income, right? So, not only is that taxed at a lower rate, but I also have depreciation on those assets that I can also use as a deduction to lower my taxes. In
right.
the trucking business, I have that set up as an S corporation, and I'm an employee of that business. So now, just like you said, like we talked about earlier, so I pay federal, I pay state, I pay unemployment taxes and all that stuff. But I get to write that off on my personal income taxes, and as my business, my salary is an expense of the business now. You know what I mean? So again, just
Gotcha.
depending upon, so I got that rental income, that passive income, that depreciation over there. I've got earned income in the trucking business, and then in the construction and development business, we have different goals and objectives, right? So it just again, it all depends upon what revenue targets you want to hit, and then breaking that down into the smallest attainable steps, and then going after it and just making that happen. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I love that. I love that. And so a lot of people they're going to be listening. It's like they're going to be confused, right? Because now you mentioned that the goal is to not pay anything in taxes, right? To basically come out even on that regard. But with that being said, doesn't that mean that you're not making any profit either, right? If you're writing off all these expenses, like you're spending that money still, like you're not really saving any money after that. So can you kind of touch on like how that really works and how?
That's the magic of entrepreneurship, man. So,
Yeah,
like, typically, it's not uncommon for businesses to not be profitable for the first couple of years, right? So, the first couple of years of my real estate business obviously was heavy in acquisitions, heavy in renovations. So, literally, that was those were losses that I took. Last year was actually profitable or pretty good. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't doing any acquisitions. I didn't have much renovation expenses incurred. It was basically just rental income coming in. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So, I had some debt on those properties that I refinanced, and so, I actually did show a little bit of profit. But again, over on the trucking business side, we had sustained heavy losses. So I took some losses in that regard. Now, there are ways that you can show profit when needed to. Like if you're going to apply for a bank loan or whatever the case is, you can look at a P&L statement and some of the things that P&L stands for profit and loss, right? So, when you have heavy mechanical issues or upgrades that you're making to the trucks, you can capitalize that, and those can kind of drop off the line so that it doesn't necessarily show as a loss. So then ultimately you can show some bit of profitability for the means of doing whatever you need to do from the bank's perspective. But over on the tax side, you can do whatever you need to do to pay those pay as little tax as possible. So
Right.
I know I'm speaking in riddles right now because I don't want to give any financial advice to anyone. I am not an accountant. I'm
Yeah.
not a financial expert. I do what's best for my business and in my best interest. But to your point, um, you can be profitable without it looking like you're profitable, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. I think the
Yeah.
big thing to come out with this is that you got to know the rules of the game, right? I mean, how many people actually understand the tax code, the tax rules, all the stuff that's going on that side, and then they don't know why they're paying all that money in taxes, right? I mean, you got to understand the rules to properly play the game and to win the game at the end of the day. And there's a reason why people like Donald Trump, Warren Buffett, they don't pay anything in taxes, and they're making profits every single year. So there's a method to the madness.
Very astute of you, my friend. And so people get mad at them, right?
Yeah.
People like hate Donald Trump and they get mad at Warren Buffett. They get mad at Bezos and
Yep.
Elon Musk when he's like, look, I have no money, man. I'm gonna have to sell stock to pay my taxes. Like, what do you want me to do?
Right.
Right. But really and truly, the government in the tax code rewards people for two things. They reward people who create jobs and employ people, and they reward people who provide housing. So if you create jobs and you provide housing, you're solving a lot of problems for a lot of people. So
Right.
as a reward, you pay less tax. So it's nothing illegal about it. It's in the tax code.
Right.
And a lot of your politicians and all these folks, these career politicians, they don't pay tax either. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So like instead of people getting angry, like I used to be, and I admit, I used to be one of those people that get pissy and upset and downright angry when I'm
Yeah.
making $250,000 a year, and I'm like, how am I only bringing home this? You know what I
Right.
mean? I say only because that is significant in comparison to what a lot of other people make. But it's like, man, this is just sucky. And that's what got me curious to figure out, all right, I'm hearing about like people not paying tax. Like, how is it? And
Yep.
then when I started reading like books like Tax Free Wealth and, you know, Millionaire Secrets and all these different things, I'm like, okay, they're not doing rocket science here. You know, the code is there if you are adapt to read it and understand it and execute it. So
Yep.
for those who are watching this and you're upset about the conversation that we're having about paying tax, do your research and you cannot pay tax to.
Exactly. Exactly. You just got to do your research. You got to go through that learning curve, right? And so now
Yeah,
you're on the other
exactly.
side of that learning curve, looking back,
Right, right,
which is
right.
pretty cool.
It's a
So
different kind of education.
yeah, exactly. They don't teach you that in school either. I mean, I wish they did, but I'm in
Yeah,
finance. I haven't learned it yet. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
indeed. When you find a college class that teaches that, let me know.
yeah, right. That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
So I really enjoyed our conversation today. We just have a couple minutes left. So I just have a few more questions for you kind of going
go
forward.
for it, bro.
So one, what are some of your, I know you mentioned some books like Think and Go Rich, but besides those books, I mean, what are some of your top book recommendations for people to be reading, whether it's like on the tax code, that kind of stuff, or just entrepreneurship in general?
A couple books. One is called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and it basically, excuse me, man, it basically teaches you that anything that offers resistance is the path you should probably take because it's a path that most people aren't taking, and there's rewards and riches on the other side of that. Richest Man in Babylon talks about the importance as an entrepreneur of paying yourself first, right? Making sure that you value yourself enough that you are going to look out for the needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs, and financial needs of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. Tax free wealth is loaded with all sorts of information on, again, how to get those tax deductions legally. All right, how to keep track so that in case you're audited, that you can justify some of these business meetings and meals and vacations and off-site retreats that you're taking. All right, again, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Um, Think and Grow Rich. It really gets you thinking on a completely different level. You know what I mean? So it really teaches you how to um, sync up your brain and your heart to make sure that your brain and your heart are always in alignment. Because a lot of times people have a duality and a sense of war within them. Whenever they're thinking one thing but feeling something else, the Bible says a double-minded man can expect to receive nothing, right? So unless these two are in sync and moving in the same direction, you're going to be paralyzed and indecision, and that's not profitable.
I love that.
What else? I have a couple books over there. There you go. But those, if you stick to those five that I just mentioned, like you'll be well heads and shoulders above on your way compared to other folks.
I love that. Well, I know I'll definitely be checking out some of those books going forward.
Yeah,
So
cool.
that's awesome. And then before we head off, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, man, I just want to say I appreciate you having me on. I really, really love what you're doing. And I hope that people find value in the conversations. And more important, everybody says knowledge is power. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is only power when it is actually put into action. So you have to take action. You have to execute the things that you learn. So
I love
that's
that. All right, guys, there you have it. Anthony Moore, thank you so much for joining me today.
all right. Thank you.
Hey, no, it